This is African American History is American History.
Hail to the Chief is played as President Johnson enters the East Room of the White House, where he will sign the new Civil Rights Bill, which prohibits the racial discrimination in the sale and rental of houses and apartments. The President at the rostrum will make remarks before signing the bill.
Members of the Congress, members of the Cabinet, distinguished Americans, and guests. On an April afternoon in the year 1966, I asked a distinguished group of citizens that were interested in human rights to meet me in the Cabinet room in the White House. In their presence that afternoon, I signed a message to the Congress. That message called for the enactment, and I quote, of the first effective federal law against discrimination in the sale and the rental of housing in the United States of America. Few in the nation, and the record will show that very few in that room that afternoon, believed that fair housing would in our time become the unchallenged law of this land. And indeed, this bill has had a long and stormy trip. We did not get it in 1966. We pled for it again in 1967, but the Congress took no action that year. We asked for it again this year, and now, at long last, this afternoon, its day has come. I do not exaggerate when I say that the proudest moments of my presidency have been times such as this, when I have signed into law the promises of a century. I shall never forget that it is more than 100 years ago when Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. But it was a proclamation. It was not a fact. And in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we affirmed through law that men equal under God are also equal when they seek a job, when they go to get a meal in a restaurant, or when they seek lodging for the night in any state in the Union. And now the Negro families no longer suffer the humiliation of being turned away because of their race. In the Civil Rights Act of 1965, we affirmed through law for every citizen in this land the most basic right of democracy, the right of a citizen to vote in an election in his country. In the 5 states where the act had its greater impact, Negro voter registration has already more than doubled. Now with this bill, the voice of justice speaks again. It proclaims that fair housing for all human beings who live in this country is now a part of the American way of life. We all know that the roots of injustice run deep, but violence cannot redress a solitary wrong or remedy a single unfairness. Of course, all America is outraged at the assassination of an outstanding Negro leader who was at that meeting that afternoon in the White House in 1966. And America is also outraged at the looting and the burning that defiles our democracy. And we just must put our shoulders together and put a stop to both. The time is here. Action must be now. So I would appeal to my fellow Americans by saying the only real road to progress for free people is through the process of law. And that is the road that America will travel. So I urge the Congress to enact the measures for social justice that I have recommended in some 20 messages. These messages went to the Congress in January and February of this year. They broke a precedent by being completed and delivered and read and printed. These measures provide more than $78 billion that I have urged the Congress to enact for major domestic programs for all America in the fiscal 1969 budget. This afternoon, as we gather here in this historic room in the White House, I think we can all take some heart that democracy's work is being done. In the Civil Rights Act of 1968, America does move forward. And the bell of freedom rings out a little louder. We have come some of the way, not near all of it. There is much yet to do. And if the Congress sees fit to act upon these 20 messages and some 15 appropriation bills, I assure you that what remains to be done will be recommended in ample time for you to do it after you've completed what's already before you. Thank you very much.
The President has now seated himself in a chair just to the right of the rostrum in the East Room from which he spoke. And in that chair now, the President is in the process of signing the new Civil Rights Bill. To make it clear what this bill calls for, it is a broad ban against racial discrimination in the sale and rental of houses and apartments. The bill also sets heavy federal penalties for interference with people exercising federally protected civil rights. This bill also prohibits interstate travel or communications with intent to incite riots and bans transmission of weapons for use in civil disorders. This same bill also contains a special Bill of Rights to help American Indians. The President has completed signing the new Civil Rights Bill, shakes hands first with Speaker of the House McCormick, and Emanuel Seller, who is the head of the Judiciary Committee, is the second man to receive a pen. Justice Thurgood Marshall on the Supreme Court is there. Mr. Johnson taking less time to sign this bill than he does on occasion with some other bills. Now a long conversation with Thurgood Marshall. The President is handing out pens. Some of these are the actual pens used to sign the bill, but most of them are pens that are packaged and ready for this handing out. Each of the pens is in a box, and it contains a little note saying that it was used in the signing of the bill. That's Mayor Walter Washington, the mayor of Washington, D.C.
Good to see you, Lloyd. Joe?
All of these various personages and personalities who at some time along what the President described as the long, tortuous road to getting this bill passed had some connection with the bill. This is one of the boxes in which the pens are contained. This gentleman receiving 2 boxes of pens. There's a White House aide standing just behind the President and to his left. Mr. Johnson can reach back. He knows the exact location and grab one of the pens from that aide, shakes hands, grabs a pen, hands it to the person. This allows many people, that's Congressman Rumsfeld from Chicago just receiving a pen. House Speaker McCormick receiving his pen. Mr. Johnson looking a bit thinner than he has in recent weeks today.
Hey, Robert.
The President will hand out several dozens of these pens. Senator Jacob Javits of New York just received his pen. Senator Edward Brooke from Massachusetts receiving his. Chet Hollifield of California receiving his. Claude Pepper of Florida, the gentleman in glasses. McCullough of Ohio having a conversation with the President, clamping his box with the pen in it together. Senator Hugh Scott of Pennsylvania also having an extended handshake and conversation with the President. Senator Scott, of course, a former Republican national chairman. The East Room filled with several hundred persons, and it appears that the President not only will give several dozen of the pens out this afternoon, may give as many as 50 or 100. Senator Clifford Case of New Jersey just receiving a pen. We're pointing out those gentlemen whom we recognize. Some of these personages, of course, we do not recognize since there are several hundred in the room. Another box of pens. Perhaps you saw it being brought in just behind the President, a military aide coming in with resupply on the pens. The President didn't appear to use more than 3 or 4 pens for the actual signing this afternoon. He's already handed out more pens than that. Senator Muskie of Maine, a fellow who just received his, young gentleman who just received his pen. Senator Tidings, Maryland. Senator Chuck Percy of Illinois following Senator Tidings. Congressman Goodell of New York just went off your screen to the left. You can see the President with his left hand just reached back and got the box of pens fed to him by his aide. The wise politician who doesn't want his lips read on an occasion such as this will turn his back to the camera and say what he wants to say to the President. Mr. Johnson shaking hands with going around the room, shaking hands with some of those persons who will not be receiving a pen directly from the President. An historic occasion in the White House East Room, as President Johnson has signed into law what he himself describes as one of the most important pieces of civil rights legislation in the history of the country. In his remarks on this occasion, the President pointed out that there is still much to be done to ensure the rights of every citizen. He expressed outrage at both the spirit and the ideas that resulted in the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, and outrage at those who would, as the President said, riot and burn. Mr. Johnson called on all Americans to put their shoulder to the wheel and put a stop to both. That is, the outrage of assassination and inequality directed toward Negroes, and the outrage that results in rioting and burning. Mr. Johnson called on Congress to pass 20 bills, including appropriation bills, which he said have already been put forward to the Congress and would help make America what President Johnson says he wants this country to be. This has been a special CBS News report, live from the White House. President Johnson signing into law the new Civil Rights Bill, which bans discrimination in the sale and rental of houses and apartments. Dan Rather, CBS News, Washington.
This has been African American History is American History.